My name is Marilyn Hernandez, and I am 71 years old. I live in a quiet suburb on the edge of San Antonio, Texas, in a house that once felt alive with laughter, but has grown more silent with every passing year. I worked hard my whole life, raised my son Alan, alone after my husband died, and thought that in my later years I would finally enjoy some peace. Instead, I found myself carrying burdens that should have never been mine to bear. For the last 3 years, I paid Alan and his wife Carrie's rent, covered their bills, bought groceries when their fridge was empty, and even helped with medical expenses when they could not manage. I told myself I was helping them through a rough patch, but the rough patch never seemed to end. Every month, I watched my savings shrink while theirs remained untouched. Alan always promised he would make it up to me. Carrie smiled sweetly and called me her second mother when she needed something. I believed them because I wanted to believe that my sacrifices meant I was still part of their lives. I convinced myself that the money bought me a place in their future. I was wrong. That truth landed on me one ordinary afternoon with a weight I could never forget. I had called Alan earlier in the week to ask if they had set a date for their wedding. He brushed me off with a vague answer saying they were still figuring things out. I wanted so badly to be part of that day, to stand proudly as the mother of the groom. I had already bought a soft pink dress that made me feel younger and more graceful than I had in years. I even tucked away $1,000 in an envelope as a wedding gift, a token of love and pride for my only son. I kept imagining myself smiling in photographs, my arm linked with Alan's proof that despite the years of sacrifice, it was worth it. So when I called again to ask, Carrie picked up. Her voice was cool, detached. She said they had already been married yesterday in a small ceremony. Then she added words that will echo in my mind forever. Only special people were invited. The moment stretched like a knife cutting through the air. My heart seemed to stop as I clutched the phone. I was not one of the special people. I was the woman who paid the rent and bought the food, but I was not worth a chair at the table on the most important day of my son's life. I stood frozen in my living room. The phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Alan was in the background, silent. He would not even meet my eyes when I saw him later that week. Carrie stretched comfortably on the sofa I had bought for them, her smile thin and smug as if she had won something. I had never felt so invisible in my own home. That night, I opened the closet and looked at the dress. The pale pink fabric hung untouched, its folds soft and lifeless. Next to it sat the shoes I had polished and prepared for the wedding. The envelope with the gift money lay hidden in the dresser drawer, useless now. I had imagined walking into a decorated hall, seeing my son in his suit and hearing the music swell. Instead, I was left with silence and an empty house. Later, I logged onto my computer and saw photographs on social media. There was Alan in his suit, Carrie in a gleaming white dress. Her parents stood proudly on either side, smiling as if they had gained the perfect daughter. Carrie's siblings clinked glasses of champagne, raising a toast in celebration. The pictures were filled with joy, yet not one image had a space for me. I stared at them until my eyes blurred. Every dollar I had spent flashed through my mind, every sacrifice I had made, and in that moment none of it mattered. I sat at my kitchen table long after midnight. The house was still the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound. My chest ached with something heavier than sadness. It was the deep ache of realizing that no matter how much I gave, I would never be enough in their eyes. I whispered into the quiet that I had been erased not by strangers, but by the very people I had loved the most. The emptiness of that night still clings to me. The dress is still there in the closet, the envelope still hidden in the drawer. They stand as reminders of what was taken from me, not in money, but in dignity and belonging. That was the night my heart broke in a way that could never be pieced back together the same again. That was the night I realized I was not family, only a convenience, and nothing would ever be the same. The night after I learned the truth, sleep would not come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy, my mind restless. Every image of the wedding photos flashed before me, each one a reminder of how deeply I had been erased. At some point, I got up, turned on the kitchen light, and pulled a notebook from the drawer. If I could not sleep, then I would finally face the truth in numbers. I began to write down every expense I had covered for Alan and Carrie over the last 3 years. The first line was rent, $600 each month, 36 months, which came to $21,600. I wrote the figures slowly, the numbers pressing into the paper as my hand shook. Next was the furniture. The living room set had cost $1,200. The bedroom dresser another $400. I kept going, each entry carving a deeper wound. Groceries were harder to track, but I guessed about $200 a month for 3 years. That was $7,200. I added the birthdays, the anniversaries, the Christmas gifts, easily $3,000 more. Then the car payment that Alan never finished, $3,000, and the repairs I had paid for another $600. Carrie's medical bills had been $800. My pen scratched across the page, making the total climb higher and higher. When I finished the list, I looked at the bottom line, $33,000. I stared at it until the numbers blurred. That money had come from my savings and from the inheritance my late husband left me. He had wanted me to have a secure retirement, not to fund a life for 2 adults who treated me like I was nothing. My tears dropped onto the paper, smudging the ink, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of betrayal mixed with the sharp clarity of awakening. I whispered to the silence that I had been nothing but an ATM with feelings. Every transaction had been a withdrawal from my dignity, not just from my account. For years I told myself it was love, but love does not come with a bill. Love is not purchased through monthly rent checks and endless gifts. Love should not make you invisible. As dawn lightened the edges of the blinds, I closed the notebook and placed it on the table. My hands were steady now, steadier than they had been in years. I knew what I had to do. I would go to the bank that morning and cancel every transfer. I would no longer allow my life to be drained away in the name of family that did not see me. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of control. It was not joy yet, but it was strength. And strength was enough to begin. The next morning, I woke before the sun and sat at the kitchen table waiting for the bank to open. My notebook with all the figures lay in front of me, the pages heavy with numbers that told a story of years wasted. At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into the branch I'd visited dozens of times before. Mr. Harris, a man who had helped me many times, greeted me with his usual gentle smile. When I explained that I wanted to cancel every automatic transfer to Alan and Carrie, his expression shifted to concern, but he did not question my decision. He simply said he would take care of it. As I signed the last form, a strange mix of fear and relief washed over me. Fear that I was burning the last bridge to my son, but relief that at last I had chosen myself. Back at home, I called a locksmith and asked him to change every lock in the house. The metallic clicks echoed through the rooms as if sealing off years of exploitation. I stood by the door when he finished and felt as if I had just drawn a line that no one could cross without my permission. Later that afternoon, a young man arrived to install security cameras. Watching him place the devices on the corners of my house gave me an unexpected comfort. For the first time, I was no longer defenseless in my own home. As I stood outside checking the camera angles, a woman from next door approached me. She introduced herself as Eleanor Brooks, 68 years old. She said she had heard some of the commotion the week before and wanted to make sure I was all right. Over a cup of coffee in my kitchen, Eleanor told me her own story of how her daughter had once drained her finances until she finally said no. She looked at me with kind eyes and said that family should never leave you empty. True family adds to your life instead of stripping it away. Her words sank deep into my heart. For years I had convinced myself that constant sacrifice was love, but Eleanor showed me that real love does not ask you to destroy yourself. I felt a small flame of hope flicker inside me. Maybe I was not as alone as I thought. Maybe this was the beginning of a life where I could choose peace over exhaustion. The locks had been changed, the cameras installed, and for the first time in years, I began to believe that I was safe in my own home and strong enough to protect it. It did not take long for Alan and Carrie to notice the money had stopped. Within a week, my phone was buzzing day and night with calls I refused to answer. When I finally picked up, Alan's voice was sharp, demanding to know why the transfers were canceled. Carrie chimed in from the background, her tone dripping with outrage. They said I was being unreasonable and that I would regret this decision. I stayed calm and told them there was nothing to discuss. The silence on the line was heavy. Then Alan said they would come by to sort it out. My stomach turned at the thought. 2 days later, I came home from a walk to find their cars parked outside my house. My front door was unlocked, and when I stepped inside, I froze. Papers were scattered across the dining table, my private documents laid out as if I had no right to privacy. Alan sat with his head in his hands, while Carrie paced like a caged animal. A man in a gray suit introduced himself as their lawyer. He said they were concerned for my mental health and wanted me to sign a power of attorney so Alan could manage my finances. I looked at the stranger flipping through my bank statements and felt a chill run down my spine. Carrie's voice was syrupy as she reached for my hand. She said that at my age, it was normal to get confused and that they only wanted to help. I pulled my hand back and told her I was not confused, and I was more clear than ever. Alan avoided my eyes, muttering that I was isolating myself and letting people manipulate me. The lawyer slid papers toward me, insisting this was for my protection. I gathered the documents, stacked them neatly, and placed them back in a folder. Then I told them that my finances were mine alone. The air grew tense, the room thick with anger. Carrie's face hardened, and she pulled out her phone. She said if I refused to be reasonable, she would call social services and report that I was unstable. I stood still, my heart racing, but my voice came out steady. I told her to make any call she wanted. My conscience was clean. I walked into the kitchen, picked up my own phone, and dialed Mr. Jensen, a lawyer I trusted from years before. He answered quickly, and after hearing what was happening, he told me not to be afraid. He said this was a textbook case of elder financial abuse, and he would stand with me. His calm voice steadied me in a way I had not felt in years. I returned to the dining room where Alan and Carrie waited with angry faces. I told them I had already contacted my attorney and that any further conversations would go through him. Alan shouted that I was destroying the family. Carrie hissed that I was ungrateful. I looked at both of them and said in a firm voice that I was done being treated like an ATM with feelings. I had never been clearer. Their fury filled the room, but inside me there was a stillness that felt unshakable. For the first time in years, I was not the one trembling. They were. The courthouse in San Antonio felt colder than I expected. I walked through the doors with Mr. Jensen at my side, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it echo in my ears. The polished floors, the heavy wooden benches, and the quiet murmur of voices carried the weight of judgment. When I saw Alan and Carrie across the room, dressed in black, as if they were attending a funeral, I felt both grief and determination. Their lawyer, an older man with a smooth voice, greeted them with confidence. I understood then that they believed they would win. When the proceedings began, their lawyer painted me as a confused old woman. He said I had grown paranoid, isolated myself from family, and fallen under the influence of neighbors who were taking advantage of me. He insisted that my refusal to keep sending money was a sign of irrational behavior. Alan followed, speaking in a voice that once belonged to the boy I raised, but now carried the tone of a stranger. He claimed I had become unpredictable, that I yelled without reason, and that I had forgotten how to manage my own affairs. Carrie wept on cue, saying she loved me like her own mother, and that it broke her heart to watch me fall apart. They brought witnesses who barely knew me. A neighbor repeated gossip that I had grown strange since installing cameras around my home. Their chosen doctor testified that my refusal of an evaluation was evidence of decline. Each word stung like a blow, but I kept my eyes forward, my hands steady in my lap. Mr. Jensen whispered that our turn was coming and to hold firm. His voice grounded me. When our side began, Mr. Jensen rose with quiet authority. He laid out bank statements and receipts, showing more than $33,000 I had spent on Alan and Carrie in 3 years. He explained how my late husband's savings had been drained by obligations that were never mine. Then he called Eleanor to the stand. She spoke clearly about my strength, about the afternoons we spent together, and how she had seen me take control of my life. Other neighbors testified that I was independent, clear-minded, and capable. Even my pharmacist came forward to explain how Carrie had twisted his words. Piece by piece, the lies began to unravel. Finally, it was my turn. I stood in the witness box and told the court that I had raised Alan alone since he was a child. I explained that love had blinded me, that I mistook financial sacrifice for belonging, and that the truth came crashing down when I was told I was not special enough to be at his wedding. My voice did not shake. I said I stopped the transfers because I realized I was financing lives that did not value me. The courtroom grew silent, the weight of my words settling on every face present. When the judge returned after deliberation, the room held its breath. His tone was steady as he declared that I was of sound mind. He said the evidence showed not confusion, but clarity, and that what had taken place was an attempt at financial exploitation. The request for guardianship was denied. The gavel struck and the sound echoed like freedom itself. Relief spread through me so strongly that my knees nearly gave way. For the first time in years, I felt the scales tip toward justice. I walked out of that courtroom lighter, carrying with me not only my dignity, but the truth that I had won my life back. After the trial ended in my favor, I knew it was time to take the final step toward a new life. I sold the house, where too many tears had soaked the walls, and moved into a smaller apartment in downtown San Antonio. The rooms were brighter, easier to care for, and filled with possibility instead of memories that hurt. From my window, I could see the streets alive with music and people, a reminder that life still pulsed all around me. I signed up for an art class at a community center where the smell of paint and the sound of laughter replaced the silence that had once haunted me. I began taking short trips to nearby towns, tasting new foods, walking through markets, and letting myself enjoy the simple beauty of living. Twice a week, I volunteered with a local group that protects seniors from abuse, sharing my story, so others might find the courage to say no before it is too late. In my apartment, I hung a single key on the wall, a quiet symbol of control. That key reminded me that I alone decide who enters my life. I reflected that being alone through neglect had once felt like a prison, but being alone by choice now felt like freedom. For the first time in years, I was free to belong to myself. A few weeks passed, and word reached me that Alan had lost his job. Carrie had taken a full-time position, leaving him to face a world he had long avoided. One evening, I found an envelope slipped under my door, with his handwriting across the front. Inside was a letter, written in uneven strokes. He admitted that fear had shaped his choices more than love ever had. He confessed that his terror of poverty made him cling to my money and let Carrie's will override his own. He wrote that he finally understood that money could never buy the affection he had tried to secure. I read his words slowly, feeling both pain and a quiet compassion. He was still my son, though scarred by choices that cut me deeply. I whispered to the night air that fear can twist love into greed, but maybe one day fear could also turn into courage. I folded the letter and tucked it away. I did not send him money, but I left open the door of reconciliation if respect and dignity ever returned. That evening, I sat on my balcony at sunset. The sky blazed orange and gold, and I told myself the vow that mattered most. I would never again abandon my own dignity.